and welcome all of the attendees to TractorZoom's Fall 2023 Equipment Market Update. This one specifically is tailored towards the ag lending industry, and so I've been able to have two guests join us today, and this is exciting from the standpoint that we're really getting outside and touching the coast, all different areas of agriculture. So I'm going to introduce our guests here in one moment. Before I do that, though, and I just want to kind of address why we felt that this was especially important at this time of the year, at this really juncture within the agricultural market. And the ag market right now and farming in general is definitely going through a bit of a shift. Values are changing from the ag equipment side, and we're going to cover a lot of that, but we're going to go into even a greater detail and start to talk about why they're changing, and the fact that if you understand why they're changing, then it helps to understand the nuances of what might need to be reevaluated, what potentially is a high risk for what you're lending against, and what is maybe an opportunity or risk for your borrowers. So just starting off here, this is actually an equipment list that I found this summer. This is my great-grandfather's, just when he started farming in Iowa, but it's back in 1923. So I thought it's pertinent to show what it was like then, and just an example of what our equipment lists look like now within TractorZoom Pro. But while that shifts a lot, I know the farming practices don't always change, but we are certainly in a time of volatility now. And so one of the major reasons why we want to have this webinar was to level set a little bit about what is changing, what's not, and what's worth paying extra attention to from a risk standpoint. So today we're going to talk about some national trends, and I'll introduce Nicole here in a second. The national trends, category type of trends, and then we're going to do some projections looking forward 3, 6, 12 months to get an idea of what you might be able to expect going into 2024. And then, like I mentioned, I've got Nicole and Graham who's joining me to help provide perspective on the ground of what they're seeing in their areas. So let me first start off by introducing Nicole. So I'm going to have to read off the bio, Nicole and Graham, because they're both impressive here and I don't want to forget anything. So Nicole Cleggs Burns is a farm loan chief in Alabama for the United States Department of Agriculture's Farm Service Agency. As farm loan chief, a position that she's held since December of 2017, Cleggs Burns directs, oversees, evaluates, and advises on a $425 million loan portfolio. She provides leadership, develops policy, and implements program guidelines to Alabama's FSA's direct and guaranteed farm loan programs. Cleggs Burns began her federal government career as a student trainee in Georgia as a USDA 1890 National Scholar. She's held various positions in FSA for the past 18 years. A native of Hart County, Georgia, Nicole is a graduate of Fort Wayne State University's College of Agriculture. While attending FVSU, she was a Reserve Officer Training Corps cadet and commissioned into the United States Army Reserves. She is deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Spartan Shield, and Coronavirus Disaster Assistance. Major Cleggs Burns currently serves as a Medical Plans and Operations Officer for a Civil Affairs Command. Her and her husband, Brandon, reside in Alabama with their 2 daughters. She enjoys spending time with family, traveling, and enjoying the great outdoors with her girls. So Graham Smith. Graham Smith, certified general appraiser. He holds a general accredited appraiser designation from the National Association of Realtors and coalition designated appraiser from North Professional Appraisers Coalition. He currently serves as the chief appraiser at Ag Carolina Farm Credit. As chief appraiser since the beginning of 2023, Graham oversees the chattel and real estate appraisal departments for the Ag Carolina ACA district, which covers 46 counties in central, eastern, and southeastern North Carolina. Graham began his journey in the real estate profession as an appraiser prior to joining Cape Fear Farm Credit in 2016, where he eventually took the reins as chief appraiser in 2019. A native of Greensboro, North Carolina, Graham is active in the appraisal industry as a member of Virginia's chapter of ASFMRA, American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, and North Carolina Professional Appraiser Coalition. Graham and his wife reside in Lumberton, North Carolina, with their 2 kids. So Nicole and Graham, thank you both for joining us. So like I mentioned, we'll cover external market factors. We're going to cover categories. We'll cover projections going into next year. And throughout this, I'm going to tie in a conversation with Nicole and Graham to provide perspective of what's going on, what they see in their area. And I think it'll be nice too, having the perspective of a Farm Credit, MNSSA, and an FSA officer to understand what they're dealing with their lenders. So a couple of things just to, again, level set from what we've heard from a lot of our clients, that this is what's happened in the past year. Equipment has been tight. It's changed the values of a lot of different types of equipment, but not equally and not across the board. So essentially, is the supply chain fixed? Is this issue persisting? There's a difference in net farm income that this year than there was last year. And last year was quite a bit different than the 2 years prior. So is that going to continue? And what effect is that going to have on prices? Obviously, interest rates are a common topic right now. So what are we expecting from an interest rate standpoint? And then what equipment is riskier? And is it something that you need to pay attention to in your lending organization? This is a question that I'll ask Nicole and Graham as well. So, Nicole and Graham, one thing that I want to maybe start this off with a question to both of you. And Graham, I might start this. This is fairly broad, but at a high level, considering everything that is going on and the concerns going into next year, are you changing your expectations, and is Ag Carolina changing their expectations of what to expect in 2024?
Andy, I don't know that we're changing our expectations, but we are just keeping an eye on what the trends in the market are doing. Trying to keep up with the most current data we have to make sure that we're correctly valuing and looking at real estate and equipment, as we're processing new requests.
Okay. Nicole, what about at the FSA in Alabama?
I'd say that we're projecting that we'll have increased loan volume. We'd expect that as interest rates continue to go higher, that we will start to offset some of those loans that are going to commercial lenders that they may not be able to cash flow with commercial lenders' interest rates, as well as values increasing, payments increasing. So we would expect our loan volume to increase.
Okay, good. And then, we had mentioned the change in U.S. farm income, which is likely tied to what you were just saying about you expecting to see the FSA loan applications to increase. The good side of this decrease in net farm income is that it really is on par with 2021. So when we talk about this being a downturn in the farm economy, it's still above a 20-year average. The different way to look at this, though, and this is from the same publication that put this out, when you look at year-over-year nominal change that's adjusted for inflation, it's a pretty massive change to what farmers were experiencing last year. And so depending on how farmers, if they're extended and how extended they might be with that, it could definitely change their operation and put some more at risk. Tighter financial conditions, though. This is just a survey that our CEO came back from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, where he's just an advisor, and they're talking about a lot of medium, large, and small firms all tightening up restrictions that they're seeing for commercial and industrial loans. Again, getting to Nicole's point and why she may see an increased loan application volume. And real quick, and I've got a question coming up for Nicole and Graham, but for the data that I'm going to show in the market trends aspect here for the different categories we're looking at, I just want to talk about where this data actually comes from. So it's first-party data that we collect off of TractorZoom.com, marketplace for auction and dealer listings. So it's something free that we provide to auctioneers and dealers, but what it allows us to do is capture real-time data by region, by model make, and with quite a bit of variable descriptions of the type. And then that allows us to aggregate that and serve that up within TractorZoom Pro. So then we can provide real-time valuations. And then so I also can digest the data and provide you with market trend information. So just if there are any questions, because I know there are a lot of new viewers on here, where this data is coming from, it's flowing in from this TractorZoom model of real-time data, auction and dealer listings. So while I'm on this one though, Nicole and Graham, and maybe Nicole, I'll throw this to you first. A lot of lenders use TractorZoom Pro, but not always in the same capacity. For your organization, for your FSA in Alabama, how do you use TractorZoom Pro?
So, well, I'll start with saying the reason we selected TractorZoom Pro was because we've had difficulties in the past with being able to find local comparatives or comps. So, we can usually find a comp in the Midwest, but that's really not a comp, right? So we can get the same piece of equipment close to the same year, but we don't know what it's selling for in our local area. So TractorZoom has opened up a better opportunity for us to have more local comps for us to look at. And so, that's pretty much what we use it for, to build our equipment list in there, to do our comps and have an easy system that averages out the numbers for us that we can plug into our farm business plan.
Yeah. Good. How about you, Graham?
Yeah, I think the reason we've started using TractorZoom Pro is for one, like Nicole said, the availability of comparable data, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing is yes, sometimes you don't find the best comp in your backyard, but things are now selling online a lot more and transacting, across the country easier than they did before with the old auction method. But, the more data we have, the more data points we have, the more accurate the values can be. And that's the main reason.
Okay, good. And just to, again, for those that aren't familiar, this is just an example of what that comp search would look like within TractorZoom Pro. So all served up there. Now we got a lot of information I want to get to, so I'm going to dive into the external factors. Then before I start asking Nicole and Graham more about national trends and what they're paying attention to from a trend standpoint, from a data standpoint, and any insights that they've gleaned over the past. But when we look at all major equipment and the environment that really influences it, obviously inflation has been an issue. And again, this coming from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, that they're looking to get inflation under control by 2026. So kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about rates. In terms of the actual rate, though, and we just had the decision, was it last week, where they held rates steady. We're going to have another potential decision in December. But what this shows right here is some experts' best guess on where they think the rates will be by the time that we get to 2026 here. So obviously, nobody's got a complete crystal ball of when this will get down there, but there is a general consensus that will be sitting around, and this is that 5.5% to 6% here for 2023. A large majority of people think it will drop by 1/4 to potentially a whole point for next year. And you can kind of see that variability grow as we go a little bit further. So again, the general consensus is that we will get this under control for a softer landing. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get down there. So one thing within market trends, and this is again within TractorZoom Pro, and I want to bring this up for a particular reason I'm going to show you in a second, is that we've done research internally within TractorZoom here with our data scientists and the data that we have to try to draw a correlation between what's going on in the auction market, so potentially liquidation values that you're looking at, and major external environmental factors, largely corn. and farm profitability. And so what we've taken is we have a used equipment index within our market trends, and we've taken that over time and mapped it against the corn values and against farm profitability over the years. And I'm going to show this a little bit later. I'm going to let this GIF play through here, but let's see. What we have is farm profitability historically in 2012, 13, 14 that were high, and then it started to dip in 2015. And we know we went kind of through that long trough up till 2020 before commodity prices rose back up and profitability rose. And I just want to show this for people that have the access to market trends, that you can go in there and follow this pretty tight, because 2012 and 2013, those indexes were high. By the time we got to 2015 and 16 here, we'll be here in a second. These are all the bottom dwellers of how the auction market did in those years, just because it is hard to tell where the market is going. So I'm going to pull up market trends a little bit later, but you can see in 2021, as we rose back up with profitability, now that essentially the auction index rose back up again, right about there. So the reason why I brought that up is because, you know, we don't do webinars all the time, probably about every quarter. And I get asked more often than that of what is the market doing? And we've got some good research behind it to show that that market trends takes into account quite a bit of variability and is fairly indicative of the direction that the market is going. Really quick on an external factor, though, I want to hit on three main points. One being China, that we're seeing. China, major producer of corn, but they produce it internally. They're going through a shift right now where they're trying to mechanize a lot of their farms because they're having a depopulation issue in the rural base. And so they're seeing a lot of machines being imported or produced within China to try to increase the size of their farms. Look at that to possibly increase their local production and decrease their dependency on exports if they're successful with that. The other big piece, and it is tied with China, that if you're watching the farm economy right now and you're talking with your farmer, all eyes are on Brazil, especially in these next week to 2 weeks. They're going through the major soybean planting time period. And so up here in the northern regions, it's extremely dry. And in Brazil, if you don't get rain as soon as you plant, nothing grows. They've already had to replant a little bit of the soybeans. And while that's beans are related to corn, because if they can plant their beans on time, then they have a chance to put in the safrinha second corn crop. And that is our major competitor. So if it rains, especially this weekend down there, it's going to drop the corn prices dramatically and put more pressure on our corn, which will have a longer impact, negative impact on what we're seeing in the markets. But if it doesn't, soybeans and corn could rally pretty extensively here in the US. And then finally, and this gets to the point that Nicole brought up a little bit earlier, and I know I've talked to Graham about this as well, is that equipment values in one region of the country are not equipment values in a different region of the country. There tends to be a certain flow of equipment as it gets traded from one buyer to the next, but also because values now are tied pretty heavily to farm profitability. Farm profitability, especially this year, is highly erratic just because rainfalls were erratic and the usage of grain and essentially the basis is fairly erratic. And so you can see here in this map, this is basis points for corn across anywhere that could potentially grow corn. You see some huge sinks here, which, you know, are good for corn sellers, high users of corn. And up here, it has more to do with where corn was successfully produced and other areas that kind of got skunked because of poor rainfall and timing. And so the reason why I bring this up is when you're looking for comps, pay attention to regional trends because it could change fairly drastically, especially as transportation costs continue to increase. It's not as easy to ship a large tractor across state lines as they used to be. Transportation costs have gone up, shipping availability is harder, and so we're starting to see larger discrepancies from regionality than what we used to. Okay, and then last point from an external market, and this is one of the questions and concerns that we had, is like, is supply still going to be an issue? And I can't say it unequivocally, but pretty close, that the supply chain is pretty close to being fixed, and there's actually an abundance of supply of most items that are out there. And so, yeah, supply is not an issue. And if you have farmers talking with you about feeling that they have to bid up because supply is short, that's just not the case anymore. There's more options out there, whether it's from dealer or auction. And what has that led to essentially? And this is all equipment. I'm going to show a lot of graphs like this, and I'll go into more detail in a moment. But this is essentially showing that from the past year, the green graph on top is accumulated supply on dealers' lots, that we're sitting, across the board with at least 30% of all equipment more this year than we were last year. And that differs a little bit by category, which we'll get into. But that's a little bit more for later. So now, before we get into the category specific stuff, I want to take a chance to talk to Nicole and Graham a little bit more about what they're seeing. So Graham, I think I might start with you on this question. And since we just talked about national trends, how closely do you monitor national trends versus regional trends? And then where do you go for this type of info?
Well, I mean, while I look at national trends, mostly I'm focused in our territory, in our area, and what the transactions there are. And while we look at, different reports and looking at reports we've done in the past internally, also just talking to market participants, talking to local auctioneers, talking to dealers and reps, and seeing what they're telling us and the feedback we're getting from them on, as well as our members and borrowers, that what they're seeing in the market and what they're seeing. So I mean, we try to take a look at all of it and kind of weigh each one and see where we head from there. But
okay, good. Nicole, what about you?
So the first thing I'm going to say is clearly I'm underutilizing Tractor Zoom because I haven't been utilizing the market trends. So I'm going to have to certainly play with that a little bit. I wouldn't say that I necessarily look at trends for equipment in the market. So for me, in my job, of course, I try to stay abreast of what's happened nationally, but my focus is in the Southeast, in Alabama in particularly. So, a good resource that I typically use when I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the area. Southern Ag Today has a great newsletter that they provide information about what's going on in the Southeast, resources. And like I said, this comes out daily, and it's some really great articles from the land grant institutions in the Southeast. And they collaborate to provide some good insight about the latest happenings in the area in agriculture and what's affecting our region. Sometimes they do talk about equipment, but it's not solely based on equipment. And then, other trends as far as what's going on in ag in the Southeast and ag in Alabama. Our state statistician, she provides a weekly report. The crop progress reports lets us know what the conditions are in ag in the state. And so, utilizing that information, it can help us project what we should be looking at and looking for.
Oh, that's good. Then I have not heard of the, you said it's the Southern Ag Today publication?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to look up that one. And then to your point on the market trends one, and that's, one of the issues, or one of the things I try to do with this webinar that I maybe haven't done in the past is it's not promotional. I want this to be educational, but I do know that I want to, kind of teach to fish as well. And so I might highlight a little bit of our market trends just to show people what they can go dig up on their own in there. Okay, on to the next question. So Graham, we'll still start with you. Over the past couple of years, what does life look like for farmers in the North Carolina area, and has that, or how has that affected their equipment decisions?
Well, I think, over the last couple of years, there have been a bunch of things that have changed in everybody's life, just the way business was transacted and the way you went about your normal day-to-day life. I think the biggest thing that impacted their buying decisions or their equipment, whether they, held onto a piece longer than they planned to or bought one earlier, was, availability and if they could get what they needed. There was a time that, a few years back, we'd see some pieces that wouldn't even get a bid on auction that we thought would sell really high. And then, then come the next year and everybody was bidding on that piece because they needed something to replace a piece that broken or outdated. So, as supply like you were showing, as supply levels out and builds back, I think some of that'll mitigate itself. But I think a lot of the decisions were made based on availability. And, if they went to go to buy a new one and they told them it was going to be a year and a half before they got it, that made the one sitting at the auction look a lot more inviting to the buyer.
Yeah. Nicole, what about you? What have you seen the last couple of years?
So I was going to say that equipment decisions are based off need and finances, but I guess they're also based off timing, right? Right. Like Graham said. So, you mentioned earlier, we've seen historically high incomes over the last couple years, but that's also been countered by, a pandemic, by rising land values, rising interest rates, rising input costs. We've seen the effects of inflation on family living. It costs a lot more to go buy those groceries than they did before. So it's been some good times, but it's been a lot of uncertainty. I mean, in farming is risky and it's full of uncertainty, but I think the last couple of years have seen that a little bit more. And what I've seen, our operating loan numbers have gone down, and most of our operating loans, our term operating loans, are for equipment and for livestock. And so I've seen the numbers go down for purchasing equipment. New equipment, most of our producers aren't buying new equipment. Most of our producers are purchasing used equipment. I don't know what the dealers are experiencing, but I'd say for us, specifically fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, the numbers have gone down compared to the previous 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've seen similar things. And then you both bring up a good point, though, in talking about kind of the changing of the times. And this will be a common theme as we get into even the category specific stuff, is the last couple of years have been good. And so whether it's an actual grain that's sitting in a bin or whether it's reserve cash, I think that'll persist for as long as it can until it's depleted. But Nicole brings up a good point that we should pay attention to when we're looking at these different graphs coming up, that the input costs on most things continue to stay high, especially the interest rates that people are paying on things. And so that'll deplete the available cash. As that depletes the farmer's available cash, then we're going to see more pressure on things like equipment values. And so we'll start to see that a little bit, but it's different for each category that we're going to hit on. One more question, though, before we hit on these categories. From Graham, and we can start with you again on this one. Any trends or insights that you think you can glean from looking in the past, and have there been any changes in your organization, whether it's finance volume, term length, amount financed, that you guys have learned from the past that you plan on implementing?
Oh, Andy, that's, I'm sure there have been some things they've changed and will change, but that's really not my area of expertise. I stick to the real estate and equipment values and appraisal, and I kind of leave the credit decisions to the other side. So I wouldn't be able to probably answer that as well as Nicole could.
Oh, pressure's on Nicole.
No pressure. The pressure's on Congress, because for us, all the way our loan amounts, our loan terms, our loan types, everything is governed by the Code of Federal Regulations. And of course, even though the farm economy may change, we don't have the flexibility to just change that. When changes come, it's usually when there's a farm bill or something like that, but they don't change throughout the year just because of the farm economy. The only thing that changes is our loan limits. So, as far as our guaranteed loan limits, so our guaranteed loan limits are adjusted for inflation each fiscal year. And so, that happens automatically, but no changes, possibly some recommended changes, but no changes take place without Congress's action.
Okay, it's good. We'll leave that one at that. Okay, so what we have now, our category specific information. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, just because I've got a few slides for each category. But again, this is going to be recorded. So if you do miss something, you can certainly go back over it. I know that not all lenders deal with combines as much as others, depending on your regionality. But there's a heavy dose of tractors in here as well. So ubiquitous across most regions. But starting with combines, because they can be the most interesting, especially with what they've gone through this past year, especially if you like supply chain issues. So what we saw was almost a 70% increase on expensive Class 8 combines in the market. And the way you can decipher this graph is orange is what's been added into the dealer market. So supply that's coming in onto dealers' lots on a 30-day rolling average. Blue is what's being sold off of the lots. And so if times are good for dealers, the blue is higher than the orange. They're outselling their supply. Well, what happened last year in November, we're still suffering a little bit from supply chain hiccups, and the OEMs were trying to produce these machines in time for harvest. They got some out in time for harvest, but not nearly all of them. And a lot of them came in late. And so what we have is a big supply coming into the dealers' lots after harvest. And that compounded a lot for the dealers because they're trading in things that should have happened before harvest. And what that led to was a huge amount of oversupply of really expensive machines. Keep in mind, these jumped about 20% in value the year prior. And so supply shot up almost 70% over the summer, or I should say leading up to the summer, with more expensive machines. It puts a lot of pressure on dealers from their holding cost standpoint. And so what they're faced with this summer was they have to move these machines, and they're aggressive with their pricing, with their deals. They essentially had to re-put their sales hats on, what they haven't had to do in the last couple of years. And now, and again, this is Class 8 combine supply, but 7s are close to this, about flat supply over what it was last year. Depends on regionality, but there was a big issue with this. And it's not that it's not an issue anymore. It's just, it's less significant. But what we noticed when you have this big sell-off, this increase in blue that happened in July into September, so essentially August, a lot of combines sold, but they were not the same that typically sold. And so our data scientist pulled this out actually recently because he thought we had an error in our data, that in 2023, almost 4 times as many combines sold in August that had less than 1,000 hours on it than had previously sold, than what we were expecting. This is a huge dump onto the market in terms of saturation of very young combines. And this has a potential whiplash, continued whiplash effect, if this oversaturates the market and there's not a continual opportunity to sell. So wanted to pull that out, that even though the supply has dropped, the supply that's sitting on farmers' lots is not the same as it's been. It's relatively young machines. So because those were younger machines, though, we didn't really see the values change a ton on the dealer standpoint. The farmers, again, there was a really big surge in values late 22, still having supply chain issues. So those are off 25%, but depending on where you have your reference point, that the combine values could only be down about 10% year over year. And these are Class 8s. I'm going to get to kind of the nuances of the different classes, but yeah, Class 8s are kind of the big problem child that were out there. And this brings out a point that Nicole and Graham have both referenced, that, you know, a lot of things depend. It depends on regionality, but a big point is it depends on your reference point of when you did your last comp. And so if you've got comparables in your equipment lists and you redid those last, you know, November 22, even let's say January, February of 23, prices, values have changed significantly since then. They probably need to be readjusted significantly down. But if your comps are from 21 for combines, Class 8s, I would say they're probably about the same. So I'm going to throw that caveat in here. I'll try to reemphasize it later, that it really depends on where your reference points are when you talk about how values might have changed. And then, you know, the index is, again, one thing that I always go back to when I talk about the market trends. And if I have a chance later in this webinar, I'll walk through that. But we are seeing large combine values, like I mentioned, down about 10% year over year. If you're dealing with Class 6 and smallers, which, you know, on the coasts, you tend to, they're steady. And so they're not made a whole lot anymore. They tend to be used, but those farmers that have them, keep them. Those prices are steady to flat. Larger models, though, maybe about down 5%, especially like a John Deere S690 or a Lexion 760 TT Case IH 9120. those are down more significantly, and they're almost need to be reevaluated a case by case basis. But supply is better. Okay, real quick from a row crop standpoint. So larger row crop tractors, bigger deal here in the Midwest where we see a lot of these. Supply is up about 55% over last year. The light combines, they were produced a little bit later when demand was lower. It happened this summer instead of last fall. And what that has done to price though, is there's still residual value, and their tractors, they hold their value. They are not as volatile to supply changes as what combines are. And so we're still seeing strong 10% at dealer increases, almost 20% for some tractors at auction. And we're actually seeing a lot of them hit the auction block right now and still holding value. And these for relatively young tractors here, 500 to 3,000 horsepower. So they're going to change at some point in time. They can't continue to rise at this particular rate. And so I'd expect that to happen here relatively soon. A lot of dealers I talked to are expecting it to happen relatively soon. We just don't know when. And so again, if we get a chance a little towards the end, I'm going to take a break and showcase a little bit of market trends and how I would go into market trends, whether it's a search or in TractorZoom trends, and suss that out. But I want to keep with utility tractors now before I go to compact. 100 to 175 horsepower utility tractors. So these guys, I love them because they're all across the United States. They tend to be a little bit more commoditized, just because you see them in all types of farms, whether it's livestock, small specialty farms. We've seen supply in these increase 23% year over year. So again, not really a supply issue with these. And this is a snapshot from within market trends. I'll show you a little bit later. On blue is your all supply and red is your sold. So you can start to see this time last year that all supply was about 4 times over what sales is. It gives you about a 4 month of supply metric, or a turns of a quarter. Now they're up to 5 times. Now, again, not an issue at all. It's just probably more of a healthy supply. But with something that's more commoditized, like a utility tractor, where there's not a lot of differentiation between them, that does tend to have a slowing effect on any kind of price increases. And this is what we see. So this is a snapshot right out of TractorZoom. This is the index. The dotted line on top is all tractors generalized, and then the solid line is these utility tractors. And we've seen at auction, this used equipment index is always at auction, these prices drop about 8% year over year with this. And again, from an economic standpoint, this is exactly what I would expect. So if you're lending, if your farmer's looking to buy, end of year buying decisions, you should be able to find some of these at auction at a discounted rate from what they were used to. And then again, this utility tractor value I pulled out in Power BI, but it's just 500 to 1,000 hours. So relatively young tractor. You're seeing some slight price increases. And the reason why this gray is auction, I should denote that blue is dealership list value, gray is average auction value. The reason why we're seeing in this range slight auction increases just because these are very attractive young tractors, whereas this graph is all utility tractors. And so you have some that are much older that are obviously depreciated faster at auction, but still a 5% year over year increase based on what we've been facing is not a very significant annual increase. Last one with tractors before I go to before I go to sprayers, and then and back to Nicole and Graham. But compacts are interesting for a couple different reasons. One is because it's not entirely ag. And so, here in Iowa, a lot of the compact tractors sold are going to agricultural places, maybe some acreage farmers. But I know once you get into more densely populated areas, a lot of these sales do go into urban centers, utilities. So you've got a lot of different factors that are pulling on compact values and supplies. The other thing, though, with compacts are during the pandemic and during the supply chain crunch, they were easy to mass produce. It was easier to ramp up production where it was harder with the larger tractors. And so you saw these come onto the scene earlier, and the supply ramped up because you have a lot of different players that can make these things. And there wasn't the allocation that there is on big equipment. And so you have a massive oversupply of compacts. And we can see now what that does to values. And so supply, this is just going to look year over year, 20% increase year over year. Compound that on the year prior, so about a 40 to 50% increase year over year. So when you compound that 2 years annually, you're getting a lot of these tractors that are just sitting on these dealers' lots, especially because a lot of the dealers that hold these are not massive dealers, and it can be a pretty decent financial burden if they're not moving them. So we've got a lot of compacts. They continue to sit around. And as you can see in the supply chart here, you don't really get a seasonal dip that you would expect or that you would hope to when you sell off last year's and before you bring on next year's inventory. So these are sticking around. Now, from a value standpoint, this is from 0 to 1,000 hours, which really encompass a lot of tractors that you'd find on a dealership. This dealer value is staying fairly steady, but dealers are stuck in an extremely hard place where they, on anything used, people have to finance that. But the new stuff that's coming out of an OEM, out of a manufacturer, is usually financed by the manufacturer at lucrative rates. And so if anything is slightly used on a dealer's lots, it's a problem child. And so they're stuck about, they can't drop the price too much or they'll be underwater, but nobody wants to buy it because the financing is poor. So I really look to auction values to see what the market is doing. And it's dropping about 10% on these. And I've seen even ones, here's our index. And this is for all compacts. It's about 12% down. So these are coming down like you'd expect with an oversupply in the market. And again, this is just a snapshot of something that we have off to the side on our market trends, but you can look model by model to see how significant price change, how significantly certain models are experiencing price changes. And this is over a 6-month period. Some, the non-John Deere models are at a steeper discount right now than what the John Deere ones are. And finally, self-propelled sprayers. I'll do this one so you can get an idea of a lot of these high value items. And then we'll get back to the discussion. But self-propelled sprayers, I can tell you from just understanding the manufacturers around this area, talking to dealers, this growing supply is higher than it was last year. And I really would be surprised if this doesn't continue to grow for a little bit longer. Combines got produced first, then larger row crop tractors, now sprayers. And so we're seeing more and more of these enter into the market. And we're not seeing this blue line surpass the sales yet. So I'd expect this to continue to grow. But for right now, values continue to be healthy at dealerships, 12% up at the dealer side. And I look at that auction to see how hot the market is. That 20% in, I've got this broken down in quarters. It only included 7 sales that have happened so far in Q4 for this type of quality sprayer. So there's going to be some variability with that, but of the anecdotal pieces at auction that I've seen, they've held up very strong. So again, a lot of strength at auction within self-propelled sprayers. It doesn't mean it's going to last. Getting back to the farm profitability, that cash is going to run out at some point in time. The supply is going to continue to rise. It's just a matter of when that tipping point happens with these sprayers. So, and then again, this is the sprayer market. So if you bought a sprayer at the end of last year or the beginning of 23, it was not a good time. So it dropped significantly from then, but we are still at this point now about that 10% to 20% over last year. At this time, I should say last year. Okay, so I just threw this in there because I get a lot of questions on planters, and planters are horrible to value from an appraisal standpoint. But we have a very smart data team in the back that's working on something that we're going to hopefully be able to unveil to you guys to help make this valuation a lot easier in the future and hopefully in the near future. So I just got a lot of questions on that. I wanted to throw this out there more or less as a teaser. But I'm not going to talk about it now. Okay, so back to you, Nicole and Graham. My voice could use a break, so I'm going to put you guys on the spot. But let's talk a little bit more on the here and now. So, and Nicole, we'll start with you on this round. But as you go into the renewal season, what changes are you expecting to see from your clients or even your broader portfolio of assets? Compared with the previous few years?
So oddly, our annual operating loan requests are the smallest percentage of the requests we get. It hasn't always been that way, but it's certainly been that way for the past several years. So our busy season is like it's not as predictable as it used to be, you know. But as I mentioned earlier, I think that we will start to see some producers that are typically solely able to get credit from commercial lenders start to come over us, maybe not fully because our loan limits are often not enough for them. But I anticipate more farm ownership participation loans. We've seen that a lot. And because as land values increase, that means down payments increase. Down payments that people want to keep some of that cash reserve, right? So we're able to assist with some of those down payments. We've talked about interest rates increasing. So interest rates increase means a bigger annual payment. And so they may have been able to cash flow, with a payment with a different interest rate, but they'll need us to assist now because the interest rates are higher. So I do anticipate we'll start to receive some more producers that were before able to solely be able to utilize commercial credit. And as far as our assets, I think that it'll probably stay about the same mix when it comes to real estate and chattel security.
Okay. Graham, what about you? Anything that you would expect to see this year?
Andy, I don't expect a big change this year. Going, as Nicole said, her busy season's not her busy season anymore, but going into ours, I don't expect a drastic change on my side from the evaluation standpoint, and doing that, we're still seeing similar numbers of requests coming in that we saw last year. So I don't expect that to change. So we'll just keep an eye on the data and see where that leads us. But I don't see a big change from the appraisal side.
Okay. And then again, I'm going to ask this to Nicole and then to you, Graham. But I'm going to throw in a wrinkle that I didn't throw at you guys earlier because you had mentioned land. And so Nicole, first to you, are there certain categories of equipment that are difficult for you to value or that you're concerned about? But also, would you mind addressing land and how that's changed in Alabama?
So equipment, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a piece of equipment that's difficult to value. I'd say the unseen equipment, because if you don't see it beforehand, if in the unfortunate circumstance we have to liquidate it, we certainly won't see it then either. But when it comes to valuation, the valuation is as good as the time in which you value it, right? Because you're making that value at a split moment in time, saying based off of what the market is now, this is what we're valuing at. And that could be good for you in the future, or it could be bad for you in the future, but you just have to make that valuation based off the information available at that time. Of course, real estate is certainly a more secure asset to have as collateral, but we certainly have a lot of chattel secured loans. Actually, about 80% of our portfolio is chattel secured loans. So that's why it's extremely important that we have a good valuation at the time of loan making, even if, that certainly the market certainly can change. And I'd say that, land values are also rising a lot faster than equipment values are rising. So another reason why land is better security, but we have a large percentage of our loans that are chattel secured.
Yeah. So Graham, same thing to you. Any equipment, and then how's land doing?
Well, I'll start with real estate. So I mean, yes, we've seen, over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, the folks leaving the big city wanting to move out of town and buy the smaller farmstead, have some acreage to spread out and not be so close to folks after a few years of pandemic. So land values continue to stay strong. Sales continue to stay up. So in our area, I mean, to Nicole's point, yes, real estate, the values don't seem to swing as fast as some of the equipment values do on certain things, but they seem to staying steady, with transactions and amounts. So, I would say, to answer your other part of the question about which equipment is probably the toughest for us to value is more of the specialized equipment. The regional commodities that may not transact in all markets and are kind of unique to certain areas of the country. So it makes it a little more difficult to find recent comparable sales data to base your valuation on.
Yeah, we hear that obviously in your guys' neck of the woods and also in California quite a bit. So, okay, I'm going to really quick hit on projections, and I'll go through this a little bit faster because I've got a couple more questions I want to make sure that I get Nicole and Graham a chance to answer. But if you remember back from what we talked about earlier about things, they tie to rates, they tie to corn, and if you want to simplify it down, that's really what we want to focus on. And so this is something I showed you earlier, and we can go into the market trends to figure this out. But overall farm profitability is tied with corn, and that makes a difference on these liquidation auction values. So I talked to our data scientist about projections into next year, and he said, if you look 3 months, we can be fairly accurate on how we're trending things. 3 to 6 months, it gets directionally okay, but not as exact. And then 6 months and out, there's a lot of other external factors that can happen to the market. And so within 3 months, end of the year buying season, if we think trend is our friend and farmers have existing profitability and cash on hand from the previous year, I would expect a region to continue, especially into December, and the valuations being what they are. And that's something that we've worked with the dealers on as well, and we'll be talking to them actually tomorrow. The end of the year buying season that I expect it to, if it's strong right now in your area, that it's going to continue to be strong, especially like things like sprayers that I just mentioned, that they're showing still good strength. If you go a little bit further out and start to go 6 months, so you're really looking into planting season within 2024, that it's carryover on profitability, just because that cash basis and cash, accounting system, that they can still hold it into next year. And I think a lot of them will, but there's certain industries that have gotten hit harder than others. Obviously, grain is down decent, but dairy's been hit the hardest from a commodity standpoint. So depending on your region, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New York have been hit probably the hardest from a commodity standpoint. And that's probably going to be reflected in local auction values. And then if you're looking larger and longer than a year out, this gets back to those external marketing factors. And the key things that you can really focus on are where the rate's going and how quickly are they going to go down. There's a lot of thought that we might actually see a rate drop in March, which is kind of hard to believe at this point in time. But I know the inflation index came out today with a lot of skepticism, but flat. So there's potential that we might see a rate drop in March, maybe. But other than that, when you're looking long term, is China going to buy from us, and how fast are they going to mechanize their fields? Because they're our number one exporter of soybeans. They take a ton of our ethanol, and those two things will drive equipment values. And then talking about soybeans, though, again, it's not exactly corn, but the more soybeans that are planted, the less corn that's planted, and the higher the corn does. So the two are tightly interrelated. And this actually gets to the biofuel standpoint, that watch this market long term, because there's a good potential that soybeans could be used for renewable aviation fuel and really spur this market along. And we might not need to export soybeans, which can take acres from corn, drive corn prices up, and we might not be a very heavily export dependent market when you're talking 12 months past now. So I'll just show these equipment values and annual changes, because I want to use the last couple of minutes to ask Nicole and Graham the last couple of questions. And this is a little off the topic of the trends, but more on data and tools, just because I think there's good things to learn from different people in different areas of the country. But Nicole, if you don't mind me asking you first, what do you use, or what does your team use in regarding data and tools that help support your customers?
So for the last couple of years, of course, we've been trying to move more to a data-driven government. And so, data that wasn't available is now available. They're making things where you can analyze it better, realizing that, something as simple as breaking out different types of races is extremely important data that needs to be captured. So, we're moving towards making data where it can be read better and do more things. And we have several visualizations. Tableau has certainly been a good friend of ours over the last couple of years. For me, it helps me to easily visualize what's going on in the offices, which offices are taking longer to process. And then, then we can decide, hey, do I need to move that workload to another office? It shows me, which counties don't have loan requests. So then we can focus outreach in those areas. So, that's certainly something that's come out in the last couple of years that's been beneficial for us. I know there was an executive order where it was focused on transforming the federal customer experience. So we've developed several tools to assist our producers. One of those is the loan assistance tool. So it's a wizard that helps producers walk through to know what they should do to be loan ready. We have a simplified loan application process that we've come up with, reduced our application from 29 pages to 13 pages. 13 pages is still a lot, but it's certainly better than 29, right? And also, we're currently going through online application pilots because we know that it's more convenient for individuals to apply online and things of that nature. So we got a lot of stuff going on. And hopefully it's doing what we wanted to do to improve our customers' experience.
Yeah, it's good. Good to hear. I do love Tableau. I'm a Power BI user myself, but Tableau is good. Graham, what about you guys? Tools and data to help support your customers.
Well, so I know from the lending side of the bank, they're looking at similar things that Nicole talked about. Better online experience, online application experience. Multiple different options for learning and educating our members and borrowers in the area. From the appraisal side, any option I get to look at more data, if I can get more sales into the database, more points to look at. So we've expanded the MLS coverages that we have in our territory to get more sales transactions there. Partnering with TractorZoom to get a better representation of national equipment databases, but still keeping those relationships with the local auctioneers that we have there here to get information from and get their analysis and their trend on what are they seeing on the people they know and they're dealing with on a daily basis. So, like I said, anything we can get to add more data points to the analysis just makes it better for the end user.
Okay, good. And one thing that we mentioned I'll just pull it up here in the background. But Nicole, I want to ask you this next question. I'm just going to pull up TractorZoom Pro because we've talked about it enough here, and then there's a couple opportunities here to help customers out with some, whether it's trends or search. But while I pull that up, Nicole, I want to ask you the next question about any challenges that you are currently facing that require some creative solutions.
So I think now our focus when it comes to creative solutions, the biggest thing on our mind is probably servicing. So COVID required us to face some challenges very rapidly. And so we utilized several solutions that were already readily available. So now we're working on trying to come up with some creative solutions for servicing because, before, if you have a couple loans that are distressed or delinquent, you can handle those. But when you have an economic downturn or big economic things to happen, economic stresses, and you have hundreds of loans that are distressed at a time, the current processes that we have are a little bit difficult to handle that. So, we've been doing a lot in trying to figure out how we can come up with some solutions that would meet the requirements that are in our regulations, as well as help the producers in a timely manner.
Good. Graham, can you top that?
No, but I'll agree that, the biggest thing is, how do we use the technology that's now available to streamline the process and make it better and more efficient and more friendly to our end user and our members? I think that's the biggest goal.
And on that point too, and I mentioned that just showcasing a little bit of how some other lenders are using the TractorZoom Pro tool, but you mentioned streamlining your process. So I know a lot of our lending organizations, and this is just kind of dummy data in here, but use our equipment lists where they input their farmers' equipment into one particular list, and then you can also categorize it by branch or location, but allows it to a real-time valuation of that equipment. And so you can go in here and see, okay, if this farmer's got 2 pieces of equipment, what's their value that they've praised it for? What's the current auction average? What's the dealer average? And that's always updated. And now, if you have 1 list, it's not that big of a deal. But when you have 10 lists, 100 lists, that's automatically updated. This is where we're working to help save lenders time and to try to provide value back to that farmer. And then there's a lot more nuances in there, whether it's in the note section or ownership, just because there's a lot of nuances within how equipment is owned. One other aspect, though, that we've seen, and dealers have used this, but also lenders are using this, when you think about adding value back to the farmer and what are other technologies and tools that you can use. We use this one quite a bit, to where if you have a farmer that has, let's just say, say they have a 9870 combine that they're looking to sell, and they don't know what they might get for it. They're considering dealer, do I auction it? You can just have a good conversation with them and say, well, at auction right now, and I could filter this down to be the right kind of SEP hours, what kind of region are we looking at? And you can provide them a PDF, shoot an export and say, here are the top 30 that have just sold this past year. And then these 6 have sold in your area. Here's probably what you'd get at auction. Take, 8% off of that for the commission you'd pay at auction, versus here's what a dealer's listing it for. And then just give them the information that they need to make an educated decision on if that's the right kind of deal for them. And then the same thing going with purchasing one. If they're looking at a dealer list price, they can say, okay, what is currently listed out there from a dealership standpoint? What kind of hours usage do I want on it? What can I afford? And then you can even get into the nuances here, and this gets into the market trends piece, but you can look at the depreciation curve of, over the period of time, from 1,500 to 2,000 to 2,500 hours on some pieces. What has actually been out there in dealers' lots and how much is it worth? So it gives them more information and helps put you in that kind of that hero seat to just utilize the technology and help them make the best kind of decisions possible. So one last thing I want to showcase on here, and I know we had talked about this, and Nicole, give you a little crash course on market trends. But we have a lot of people that'll come in here and they can choose from, wherever they're leveraged. Say if, I know in some areas of the South, self-propelled sprayers, especially let's say in Texas, using a lot on the cotton crop. You can see how that's done at auction. You can see the supply and demand value over a period of time, or insert, kind of your own time period. You can also see what's currently out there and how much each one is listed for on average by model number. And really right here, you're seeing some sales start to decline. This is really seasonality, but supply, like I mentioned, is increasing, and you're getting that bigger gap there. And really, I like to go down here from a location standpoint, and where do we see these things sitting across the country, and then the depreciation curve, which I know is important once you're looking at, okay, what's the value going to be worth? If you have this for a few years and it gets to 3,000 hours, whether it's auction or a dealer list price. So a lot of different things that people can use these market trends for. But again, getting back to your guys' point, what tools you have available that you can use to help your end user. I don't know, we've definitely gone a little overboard in terms of time, 5 minutes. But Nicole and Graham, do you guys have any last minute comments that you'd like to share? Otherwise, I can wrap things up.
Andy, I just say thanks for the opportunity to get on and talk with y'all today.
I ditto. Thank you.
Okay, well, I really appreciate both of you joining me. I definitely had to pressure you guys. I really appreciate your willingness just with the simple ask to hop on, share your experience. And like I said, what we're trying to do here in TractorZoom and with this webinar is just help lenders across the country be able to help their farmers and help move the industry forward. So Nicole and Graham, thank you both very much for all the registrants and the attendees out there. We really appreciate you hopping on this webinar. If you have any questions on TractorZoom and how we're helping lenders, feel free to, you can visit us at TractorZoomPro.com. You can always shoot me an email at acampbell@TractorZoom.com, and it can be specific to the product. It can be about how sprayers are doing in Georgia. I love to talk about both. So anyways, thanks everybody for hopping on, and have a great loan renewal season. Take care.